Survey, Ukrainians skeptical of Trump's peace efforts. On April 1, the Kyiv International Institute of Sociology, KIS, released a survey showing that more than 50% of Ukrainians are skeptical of U.S. President Donald Trump's efforts to bring peace, fearing they may result in an unfair resolution to the Russia-Ukraine conflict. The survey, conducted between March 12 and March 22 with 1,326 respondents across Ukraine, revealed that 32% believe any peace achieved through Trump's efforts would likely be somewhat unfair, although it might still meet some of Ukraine's demands. Another 22% feared a completely unfair peace. Only 3% believed that Trump could deliver a completely fair peace, while 15% thought it might be somewhat fair but would require significant concessions to Russia. President Trump has previously claimed he could quickly end the war that has lasted more than 3 years between Russia and Ukraine. However, he has at times echoed the Kremlin's narrative on the conflict and even blamed Kyiv for starting the war. He also temporarily halted military aid and intelligence sharing with Ukraine. The latest findings show a marked increase in public skepticism compared to a similar KIS survey conducted in December last year, when only 20% anticipated a somewhat unfair peace and 11% feared a completely unfair outcome. KIS executive director Anton Hrushitsky noted, even before 2025, there was growing disillusionment in Ukraine with U.S. actions. The current policies of the Trump administration are fueling even greater dissatisfaction with the United States. Additionally, the survey revealed that 67% of Ukrainians believe the U.S. is growing tired of supporting Ukraine and is pressuring the country to accept concessions during peace negotiations.
Western alliance increases pressure on Russia. Italy witnesses pro-European demonstration. Western allies pledge to increase pressure on Russia. On March 15th, after chairing a meeting of the Coalition of the Willing, a group of Western nations committed to supporting Ukraine, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer declared that world leaders had agreed that Russia's response to the peace proposal was not good enough and that sooner or later, Moscow will have to come to the negotiating table. Prime Minister Starmer emphasized, "We have agreed that those present at this meeting will collectively apply pressure on Russia." The meeting was attended by approximately 25 nations, including European countries, the European Commission (EU), the North Atlantic Treaty Organization (NATO), Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, along with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. The summit took place at a critical moment as the conflict enters its third year, with Russian forces striving to regain control of Kursk and push back Ukrainian troops. Without revealing too many details, Prime Minister Starmer announced that the military forces of Ukraine's allied nations would convene in the UK on March 20th to develop strong and decisive plans for maintaining peace in the event of a ceasefire agreement. "We will transition to a phase of military action planning. Our armed forces will meet in the UK to formulate robust and sustainable strategies to support a peace agreement and ensure Ukraine's long-term security," Starmer stated. Additionally, he affirmed that allies would continue to provide military aid to Ukraine and tighten economic sanctions against Russia to weaken its military strength and force Moscow into negotiations. When asked about the stance of the United States, Prime Minister Starmer stressed that Washington remained committed and that achieving peace in Ukraine must be done in coordination with the U.S. Italy witnesses pro-European demonstration. In another development, tens of thousands of Italians participated in a massive demonstration in central Rome to express support for Europe. The demonstrators waved the European Union (EU) flag to show solidarity amid debates over the European rearmament plan. This initiative was launched by Italian journalist Michele Serra in late February through an editorial in La Repubblica titled "Say Something European." He wrote, "I want to organize a large demonstration of European citizens in support of unity and freedom in Europe. No party flags, only the European flag. The movement's slogan was, 'We build Europe here, or we lose it forever.'" The movement emerged amid increasing tensions between Europe and the United States due to President Donald Trump's policies, the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, and transatlantic trade disputes. Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni has been reluctant to support the EU's rearmament plan, fearing that European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen's proposal could place additional financial strain on Italy, which already bears a substantial national debt. The EU plan aims to mobilize approximately 800 billion euros over the next 4 years, primarily from member states, to boost defense and internal security spending. Prime Minister Meloni has publicly criticized the plan, rejecting the term rearmament and urging European partners to focus on defense and security rather than increasing military budgets. Organizers of the March 15th demonstration reported that at least 30,000 people attended the event at Piazza del Popolo in Rome, representing various political ideologies. Daniel Cotto, one of the demonstrators, stated, "We are here to defend freedom and democracy. These are values we have known for over 80 years, but in reality, they need to be safeguarded. We cannot take them for granted." Meanwhile, right-wing parties in the Italian government largely ignored the event, instead supporting Prime Minister Meloni's efforts to mediate between the EU and US President Donald Trump. Before the demonstration, Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister Antonio Tajani emphasized, "We support Europe, but through concrete reforms, not symbolic events." Deputy Prime Minister Matteo Salvini, leader of the Eurosceptic League Party, openly criticized the movement. He declared, "While some gather to wave flags, we are working to change this Europe, a place that imposes absurd rules that harm workers, farmers, and entrepreneurs." Russia declares successful interception of large-scale Ukrainian UAV attack. On March 13th, a spokesperson for the Russian Ministry of Defense announced that the campaign to push Ukrainian forces out of the Kyiv region had entered its final stage. The Russian Ministry of Defense stated that its air defense systems had successfully intercepted and shot down 77 Ukrainian unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, during an attack that lasted from the evening of March 12th to the morning of March 13th. According to information from the Russian Ministry of Defense, these interceptions took place in multiple locations, with the highest concentration in the Bryansk region, 30 UAVs, and the Kaluga region, 25 UAVs. Additionally, Russian air defense forces also shot down 6 UAVs in Kursk, 6 UAVs in Voronezh, 5 UAVs in Rostov, and 5 UAVs in Belgorod. Ukraine faces difficulties on the Kyiv front line. As Ukraine's 8-month offensive in Kyiv gradually loses ground, experts say that despite some gains, Kyiv has also suffered serious losses. 8 months after launching a surprise attack on Russian territory, Ukraine's position in Kyiv is gradually becoming shaky. As of March 12th, the town of X, located just a few kilometers from the Ukrainian border, remained the last crucial stronghold in Ukraine's breakthrough zone. However, according to Roman Senko, Secretary of the Defense Committee of the Ukrainian Parliament, Russian troops had entered the town and were attempting to cut off Ukraine's supply lines. Senko stated that fighting was still ongoing, with Russian forces controlling part of the area across the river. However, he also clarified that no official reports had confirmed a full withdrawal of Ukrainian troops. Statements from Ukrainian officials suggest that at least part of their forces has begun retreating. Observers note that Ukraine's campaign in Kyiv has exposed several shortcomings. Initially, Kyiv hoped that the attack would force Russia to divert troops from Donbass to defend its territory, thereby easing pressure on Ukraine's eastern front. However, the reality did not unfold as expected, and Ukraine has lost additional territory in Donetsk over the past 8 months. Russia gains the upper hand on both fronts. The conflict in Kyiv demonstrates that Russia holds a significant advantage, with a 10-to-1 ratio in artillery, a 5-to-1 ratio in UAVs, and infantry forces comparable to Ukraine's. Meanwhile, in Donbass, Russia continues to maintain greater military strength and has expanded its territorial control in recent months. According to experts, Russia has chosen a war of attrition strategy in Kyiv, forcing Ukraine to divide its already limited resources between this front and Donbass. As a result, Moscow has been able to exploit the situation to gradually weaken Ukraine's military capabilities on both battlefronts. Although the Kyiv campaign allowed Ukraine to make a psychological impact by becoming the first army since World War II to strike Russian territory, the momentum was short-lived. Many Ukrainian soldiers have reportedly begun questioning the rationale behind maintaining a presence in Kyiv, while the Donbass front line remains highly contested. a lack of clear objectives, and limited resources has hindered Ukraine's ability to hold onto its key positions. Analysts suggest that Ukraine's inability to retain control of QU means losing a crucial bargaining chip in any future negotiations with Russia. Ukraine agrees to a 30-day ceasefire proposal with Russia. On March 12th, Ukraine's leading online media outlet ABC Ukraine reported that the country's government had agreed to a 30-day ceasefire proposal with Russia. This move is seen as a strategic step to facilitate negotiations aimed at ending the conflict. Ukraine's Foreign Minister, Andriy Sybiha, posted on his personal Facebook page, emphasizing that this proposal does not mean freezing the conflict, as some have feared. He stated, "Ukraine does not hinder peace. We are partners in the process of restoring peace. This happens when allies and partners speak openly, sincerely, and substantively." Minister Sybiha also noted that this proposal would only take effect if Russia agreed to it. Currently, the United States is discussing this matter with Moscow regarding the significance of a temporary ceasefire. He further explained, "This ceasefire is not about freezing the conflict. It is an effort to pave the way for ending hostilities fairly. It is also an opportunity to see who truly cares about peace." U.S.-Ukraine economic cooperation talks. In addition to the ceasefire discussions, U.S. and Ukrainian delegations also explored the possibility of signing an agreement for joint development of critical mineral resources. According to a joint statement, the U.S. and Ukraine have agreed to finalize this agreement as soon as possible to strengthen Ukraine's economy and ensure the country's long-term prosperity and security. Earlier, during negotiations in Reda, the Ukrainian and U.S. delegations made significant progress. Both sides agreed to initiate further discussions aimed at achieving lasting peace and ensuring long-term security for Ukraine. France urges stronger pressure on Moscow. U.S.-Russia talks on negotiation process. On March 15th, U.S. Secretary of State Mark Rubio and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov held a phone conversation to discuss the next phase of negotiations aimed at ending the Russia-Ukraine conflict. U.S. State Department spokesperson Tommy Bruce stated that both top diplomats agreed to continue efforts to restore communication channels between Washington and Moscow. The announcement did not specify the exact date for the next round of U.S.-Russia negotiations, which are being hosted by Saudi Arabia. Additionally, Secretary Rubio updated Minister Lavrov on military activities in the Middle East, where U.S. forces carried out airstrikes on March 15th targeting Houthi militant positions in Yemen. Despite recent tensions between U.S. President Donald Trump and his Ukrainian counterpart Volodymyr Zelensky, Kyiv has agreed in principle to a 30-day unconditional ceasefire brokered by the U.S., provided that Moscow halts its offensive in eastern Ukraine. However, Russian President Vladimir Putin has yet to agree to any ceasefire. Instead, Moscow has outlined conditions that differ from those stated in the U.S.-Ukraine agreement. French President, increased pressure on Russia is necessary. On the same day, in a statement following an online meeting with Ukraine-supporting nations chaired by UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, French President Emmanuel Macron emphasized that Russia has not demonstrated genuine commitment to peace. According to Macron, Russian President Vladimir Putin is escalating the conflict to gain battlefield advantages before entering negotiations. President Macron stated, "Russia needs to provide a clear response. We must also coordinate with the U.S. to apply stronger pressure on Moscow to achieve a ceasefire." Since returning to the White House in January, President Trump has expressed his desire to end the 3-year-long Ukraine conflict and has taken steps to improve relations with President Putin. Earlier, in an interview with local media on March 14th, published late on March 15th, President Macron warned that if Russia does not show a sincere commitment to peace, President Trump will tighten sanctions and take retaliatory measures. This would completely shift the dynamics of the situation, Macron asserted. According to the French president, planning is being expedited in countries willing to provide security assurances for Ukraine if a ceasefire agreement is signed, including the UK and France.
For Eastern European countries announce withdrawal from Ottawa Treaty, raising concerns of escalation with Russia. On March the 23rd, Poland and 3 Baltic nations, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, all former Soviet republics, jointly announced their decision to withdraw from the Ottawa Treaty, an international agreement banning the use of anti-personnel landmines. The move comes amid growing tensions on the eastern border with Belarus and Russia. The Polish government stated that clearing landmines along the eastern border is necessary to enhance national security. However, observers warn that the decision may spark a new wave of regional tensions. Russia, although not a signatory to the Ottawa Treaty, has strongly criticized the move, arguing it threatens regional security and undermines international stability. In a joint statement, the defense ministers of the four countries said the withdrawal would give their armed forces greater flexibility and freedom to use weapons, including anti-personnel mines, in the face of escalating threats from Russia and Belarus. While the decision has yet to be ratified by the respective parliaments, the announcement has already triggered major concerns. Within the European Union, EU, several member states have warned that the withdrawal could lead to a domino effect, undermining other global arms control agreements. The move follows the decision by the Biden administration to approve military aid to Ukraine, including the provision of anti-personnel mines, in response to Russia's increased deployment of ground troops. Ukraine, also a signatory to the Ottawa Treaty, has declared an exemption for territories under Russian control. Germany's DW News outlet noted that the announcement comes at a sensitive time, as Russia and Ukraine may be approaching a long-term resolution to their three-year conflict. Polish Deputy Prime Minister Wojciech Kamysz stated that Poland could withdraw from the treaty through national legislation, subject to presidential approval, followed by official notification to the United Nations. The withdrawal would take effect 6 months after notification. In response, Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Maria Zakharova said Russia would implement military technical measures to safeguard its national security. She emphasized that the actions of Poland and the Baltic states would escalate tensions in Europe and weaken international security arrangements. According to Russia's TASS news agency, the EU has so far issued only limited responses. Analysts warn that if diplomacy fails to curb the initiative, it could set a dangerous precedent for other regions around the world. In such a scenario, minefields along borders would not only serve as physical barriers, but also become powerful political symbols of division within Europe.
President Trump, "I am the only one who can stop Putin," calls for an end to Russia-Ukraine war. On March the 23rd, during an interview with the .cl founder Chavit, U.S. President Donald Trump stated that ending the war between Russia and Ukraine would be a positive step, and emphasized that efforts to prevent the conflict from escalating have been somewhat successful. "I think the situation is somewhat under control. It would be great if we could stop it," Trump said. The U.S. president also reiterated his good relationship with Russian President Vladimir Putin. "I know him very well. It's amazing that we never had any serious confrontations," he said. Trump pointed out that Russia's annexation of Crimea happened during the Obama and Joe Biden administrations, and the current conflict in Ukraine also began under Biden's presidency. "I don't think anyone in the world can stop President Putin, except me," he stressed. Trump revealed that he had very rational discussions with Putin and called for an end to the fighting. "Both Russians and Ukrainians are losing around 2,500 young people each week," he added. While he declined to set a specific deadline for a ceasefire agreement, Trump expressed confidence that a temporary truce could be reached soon. Analysts suggest that Russia wants to prolong the negotiations to gain more ground on the battlefield and enter peace talks with a stronger position. A Russian diplomat told the Moscow Times, "Time is on our side, and we will try to make the most of it." Moscow reportedly wants the current negotiations to resemble the Minskaya agreement, meaning a long and complex process. Fedor Lukyanov, editor-in-chief of Russia in Global Affairs, commented, "Things are unfolding according to Russia's preferred scenario. There is still uncertainty about a proposed ceasefire on energy infrastructure and naval targets in the Black Sea. Even if implemented,
experts believe it would not significantly alter the battlefield dynamics, where Russia currently holds the upper hand. A Russian official noted that the Kremlin hopes the U.S. will quietly allow Russia to continue its military advance while diplomats negotiate, or even pressure Ukraine to withdraw completely from Russian-occupied regions, including Kherson and Zaporizhzhia.
Russia strengthens forces near Sumy. Ukraine warns of imminent attack. Russia prepares for a new offensive. Ukraine calls for allied action. Moscow is concentrating a large number of troops near the Sumy region, raising concerns about an imminent attack. On March 15th, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky stated, "We are fully aware of this and will take countermeasures." He emphasized that Western allies need to understand Russian President Vladimir Putin's strategy. What is he planning? What is he preparing for? And what is he deliberately ignoring? According to Zelensky, Russia's troop buildup indicates that Moscow is prolonging the conflict despite diplomatic efforts to achieve peace. The Ukrainian president also dismissed Russia's claim that a ceasefire is too complex, asserting, "In reality, everything can be controlled, and we have thoroughly discussed this with the United States." He accused Russia of intentionally stalling negotiations and stressed that immediately following talks in Riyadh, Moscow continued escalating its military operations. Military analysts suggest that Russia is attempting to push Ukrainian forces out of key defensive positions in western Russia, adding further pressure on Kyiv. In response, U.S. President Donald Trump has warned that thousands of Ukrainian troops are at risk of being completely encircled. Ukraine calls on allies to ensure security through military deployment. Also, on March 15th, President Zelensky urged Western allies to take a clear stance on ensuring Ukraine's security, including deploying military forces within the country. In a speech on social media, he stated, "These forces must be stationed directly in Ukraine. This is not only about ensuring Ukraine's security, but also the security of all of Europe." UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer also announced that the Coalition of the Willing, a group of Western nations, is developing plans to support Ukraine's security on land, sea, and air in the event of a peace agreement with Russia. Following an online meeting with about 25 Western leaders, Starmer emphasized, "We will strengthen Ukraine's defense capabilities and armed forces, while being ready to deploy troops if a peace agreement is reached to ensure comprehensive security." UK reaffirms cooperation with the US in peace assurance plan. Additionally, Prime Minister Starmer stressed that any plans related to a ceasefire with Russia must involve cooperation with the United States. When asked whether he would continue seeking security support from Washington, Starmer reaffirmed, "The U.S. stance remains unchanged. I have made it clear that this must be carried out alongside the U.S. We are in constant communication with Washington every day."
White House sets April the 20th as tentative ceasefire date between Russia and Ukraine. According to a report by Brahm news agency citing an anonymous source, the White House has tentatively set April the 20th as the start date for a ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine. However, several sensitive issues remain unresolved between Russia and the U.S., most notably Washington's reluctance to limit arms deliveries to Kyiv, a key demand from Moscow in the ongoing negotiations. The U.S. has emphasized that suspending military aid to Ukraine during the ceasefire is one of Moscow's main conditions. Officials from both sides continue to negotiate in hopes of reaching a consensus. Only when all terms are agreed upon will the ceasefire officially come into effect. Additionally, Russia has called for the establishment of an effective mechanism to monitor compliance with the ceasefire agreement. Moscow has expressed frustration, noting that it has yet to receive any concrete proposals from Washington on this matter, aside from some constructive remarks from U.S. allies. Experts have raised doubts about the feasibility of effective monitoring, citing the nearly 2,000-kilometer-long front line, which makes overseeing such a vast battlefield exceptionally difficult. Commenting on the ongoing talks taking place without direct involvement from Ukraine, American analyst Mark Galeotti stated that, in reality, President Trump appears to view himself as the owner of Ukraine and assumes that Kyiv will comply with any deal he reaches with Moscow. Galeotti added that Trump regards Ukraine as a bought country and believes he can strike a unilateral agreement with Russia, subsequently forcing Kyiv to accept the terms after the fact. This view is echoed by other experts, who argue that Trump has long held an unfavorable attitude toward President Volodymyr Zelensky, and has not hidden his disdain. Given the current circumstances and Trump's characteristically impatient approach, he may be sidelining Zelensky and accelerating efforts to replace Ukraine's leadership. It seems the 47th U.S. president is seeking to demonstrate that Zelensky's role in the peace process is now insignificant.